Well, the last time the UFC held an event here in Dallas, Texas, the event featured arguably the fight of 2014. They return almost exactly 1 year later with a very entertaining card, at least on paper, and one that has kind of snuck up on us. Hello again, everyone. I'm Ariel Helwani here in Big D. I'm being joined by our very own Shaun Al-Shatti of MMAfighting.com. And Shaun, I say it snuck up on us because, UFC 184, a lot of buzz. There was a lot of buzz for the events in January. And this kind of felt like one of those cards that it was good on paper. There was a lot going on. There was something for everyone. But I always felt in the back of my mind it wasn't going to happen. And it actually stayed intact. Yeah. No injuries on the main card.
Absolutely. And that's an excellent surprise, too. It's one of those things where you see it in advance, a couple months in advance, and you're like, there's no way that this card's going to be what it is right now. And it made it. It's an excellent card. It's a card for the fight fan more than anything else, I think.
And let's talk about what we're dealing with here. Of course, the main event features Anthony Showtime Pettis defending his UFC lightweight title against Rafael dos Anjos, who has won 8 of his last 9. And in the co-main event, we have Carla Esparza defending her UFC strawweight title for the first time against the very entertaining Joanna Jedrzejczyk, of course, of Poland. Let's talk about the main event first. When Rafael dos Anjos came to the UFC, he lost his first 2 fights. First 8 fights, he was 4-4. Since then, he's 8-1. Yeah. Is it a little surreal, surprising to you that he's actually in this position fighting for the belt?
It's not surprising, but it almost feels like he's been hiding in plain sight in a way because, he's been in the UFC 7 years. He's fought 17 times in the UFC. He's fought a murderer's row for the most part in those 17 fights. And yet Anthony Pettis, who's, only fought a handful of times comparatively, he's the one that fans are latching onto. He's the one that fans are excited about. It's still difficult to find people that are excited for Rafael dos Anjos, people that are really latching onto him. It's strange, and it's a strange dynamic because it is polar opposites in that way.
Well, I think it goes to show that winning sometimes isn't enough. Yeah. You have wins over guys like Benson Henderson and Nate Diaz and Donald Cerrone. You can't beat that, but sometimes you have to do a little more. I feel like he's doing a little more, but some guys are only going to go so far as the outside of the cage stuff is concerned.
You mean doing a little more in terms of just
promotion, talking smack, things like that. At the end of the day, love it or hate it, that stuff sells. Yeah, and he has, especially over the past couple of years, really made an effort to improve his English, and it shows. He can do interviews in full English now. But yeah, some people, it's hard for them to really put themselves out there. And I feel like he's one of those guys. He just wants to fight. He just wants to fight, and he's going to keep it respectful. And that's admirable. I'm all for that. But if you're that way and you fight a certain way, and I guess if you've created, because early on he created sort of this image where he was just going to be this journeyman. He's just going to win some, lose some, and he's always going to hang around, but he's never going to get 10. If you create that early on and you have that personality, I think it just kind of ingrains in people's heads, and it is harder for you to really break through. That's a great point. No disrespect to these guys, but I always kind of felt like he'd be in that Gleison Tebow, Thiago Tavares territory. Around the UFC for a long time, in fights, but win 2 or 3 here, lose 1 there. To see him in this position, to me, is surprising. It's a testament to him, and really a testament, in my opinion, to Rafael Cordeiro, who has turned him into an unbelievable striker. You were there in Phoenix, what he did against Nate Diaz, chopping that leg. It's one of the great comeback stories, if you will, in MMA or UFC history, at least in recent memory, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This was a guy who, he lost his 2 UFC fights. He was 4-4 as recent as maybe 3 or 4 years ago. The way he's been able to put it together, he might honestly be, aside from Pettis, one of the best strikers in the lightweight division at this point, and he's quietly doing all of this. And he's the resume he's amassed is just impeccable. He outstruck Donald Cerrone, knocked out Benson Henderson in the first round, which I still maintain is just ridiculous. Yeah. And he destroyed Nate Diaz. He has an excellent resume. It's just people haven't seemed to latch onto him.
All that being said, what kind of a chance do you give him against Pettis?
Man, I honestly don't know, because it feels like when we see Anthony Pettis, that's someone special. It feels like we're witnessing something special. He might be one of the most gifted offensive fighters in the UFC. He's one of the most dynamic fighters in MMA. Just like, obviously, there's the cartwheel kicks and the Showtime kicks and the Showtime knees, but even the basic stuff, the stuff that everybody can do, he uncorks it with such a different degree of velocity and ferocity that other people just can't match. Just even the high kicks, the low kicks, the mid kicks. His kicks, they sound like a gunshot. They're the loudest kicks that I've ever heard. He was at Wednesday's open workouts just kicking the pads, and each one sounded like an explosion. And especially his body kick and his high kick he's able to mask it for about half of the kicks. So you don't, if you're fighting against him, you don't really know whether he's going high or mid until it's too late, and it's very deceptive. The combination of abilities that he has is remarkable. And honestly, he's talking about fighting 4 times in 2014 or 2015. I'm sorry. If he's able to do that, he seems very determined to do that. If he's able to do that, I think he can become one of those next level superstars by the end of the year. Just because, again, we don't see him. The last fight against Gil, it was kind of a warm-up fight because it was like, oh yeah, Anthony Pettis can fight. We had to remind everybody that, oh yeah, Anthony Pettis is pretty good at this. And now it feels like he's almost at that tipping point where if he can continue to do this, he's that guy.
One of those rare fighters and athletes where it legitimately feels like a treat to see him fight. Like, if you ask me, who would you, if you had to pick a guy that you would gladly pay money to watch, he's at the top of that list. He's so entertaining. You were talking about Dos Anjos' striking, and at his core, when he first started, he was a jiu-jitsu guy. You just spelt out, Pettis' his artistry on the feet. What do you think happens in this fight? Does Dos Anjos continue to prove that he's a great striker, or does he go back to his roots?
Well, that's the interesting thing is the narrative, at least before the Gil fight, was how do you beat Pettis? You beat him with pressure. You beat him like, Jeremy Stevenson gave him some trouble and Clay Guida beat him. You beat him with pressure. But then that's the game plan that Gil did. If that's the truth, then Gil had the perfect game plan. And maybe he won the first round, but even then, Pettis was busting him up. And at 2 minutes in that second round, once he made that adjustment, he just blew right through Gil, and he submitted Gil with a guillotine. That is a different level of amazing, just being able to submit a guy like Gil with a guillotine. And so that's the thing, is that Rafael Dos Anjos, he's the whole time been saying that he's going to win because of his pressure. He's a very pressure-oriented fighter. He's forward and back. He's forward pressure, low kicks, that type of thing. I don't think that's the way you beat Pettis. I was talking to Anthony Pettis about this, and I actually agree with him. He's the best counter striker in the whole 155 division, and he may be the best counter striker we've ever seen at 155. And so the idea of forward pressure being able to beat him, you're playing right into his hands because he's able to get that space to create and fire off of what you're doing. If you look at it, there's very few ways that Rafael Dos Anjos can win in this fight. There's just very few ways that he's better than Anthony Pettis. I just don't see it happening, to be honest.
So what do you think? Is this another quick night for Anthony?
I don't know if it's quick. I think maybe second or third round knockout. Okay. And it's weird too because the whole time everybody's overlooking Rafael Dos Anjos. Everybody's overlooking him, and it seems like that's still happening. It almost feels like he's a placeholder for Khabib Nurmagomedov, and that's a continuing theme that's going on. And so you don't want to short the guy, but man, yeah, I think this is one of those ones where Anthony's just gonna show us why he's gonna be that superstar.
All right, let's talk about the co-main event, and I'm very excited about this because we are seeing the birth of a potential star in Joanna Jedrzejczyk. She has done a tremendous job selling herself, the stuff that she does at these face-offs, the way she looks at Carla, what she says to Carla. I mean, this is a person who a year ago, let's be honest, no one really thought. I mean, she wasn't in the UFC. She was not even fighting at 115, and she has come in, and I think a lot of people wanted to see the Claudia Gadelha fight, and she spoiled that party in December, and she's done a great job. And of course, the scene in Poland thriving very well. She perhaps could be the face of that if she wins on Saturday night. Do you share all these sentiments? Are you as much on that bandwagon as I am? Because I think she's incredibly entertaining.
I am 100% on that bandwagon. You're right. The people wanted to see that Claudia Gadelha fight. And I think a lot of people didn't know a lot about Joanna, and she surprised a lot of people. And so it's starting this little momentum train. But her personality is so engaging. She's so great. She's smiling all the time. She's talking smack. She's doing the little finger waves.
She's wearing overalls down like a b-boy. It's tremendous.
It's absolutely tremendous. And that little stare down thing she does where she gets in her face. Even today during Thursday's media day, they're like she's jawing at Carla on the side, and people are kind of needing to get in the middle of her.
Pettis included.
Yeah, and she's just don't smile, don't be smiling. You don't know what's coming, and it's just she gets it. She gets it, and it's been cool to see the fans embrace her because you're right. This is someone who a year ago, 2 years ago, we had no idea about her, and now she very well could be on that path to becoming that breakthrough star.
But then you look at the fight on paper and you say you have this amazing wrestler against this great striker. This is classic. I mean, this is MMA 101 from the early days. What kind of a chance do you give her?
I give her a chance just because she calls herself the fastest hands in MMA, and her hands are extremely fast. Her punches and she has really nasty uppercuts. But Carla, her wrestling is just on a different level than I think a lot of the women in the 155 or the 115 division. she just drowns people. Her chain wrestling is just extraordinary, and it seems like one of those fights where the wrestler versus striker fights, the wrestlers usually win.
Do you think Carla is going to dominate, a little ragdolling? I mean, is this going to be a very one-sided fight? Because again, on paper, it could lead to that.
I don't know if it's going to be one-sided from the outset. I feel like it's going to be really competitive for maybe the first 2 rounds, especially because Joanna, her takedown defense is surprisingly good. Like, we really thought Gadelia was going to own that space, and she was able to fight off so many takedowns throughout that fight. And her get-ups are extremely good. She's able to get a really wide base, and she's really able to explode up. But yeah, I feel like as the rounds go on, she's going to kind of drown her. Like I said, that chain wrestling is just so relentless, especially if you're not someone who has grown up in wrestling, who's able to do that. Yeah, I feel like this is kind of going to become similar to the Rose fight towards the 3rd and 4th round, where it's just too much. You just can't prepare for wrestling like Carla has. And yeah, I think it's going to be maybe like a 4th round finish.
You know, it's funny, UFC 184, of course, just wrapped up. The dust has settled on the Ronda Rousey show, at least for now. And then here comes the second women's champion. Do you feel like there's pressure on her to keep that train going along? Because it feels today like women's MMA has never been talked about this much. Even, I mean, for God's sake, Manny Pacquiao's being asked about Ronda Rousey now. You know, it's amazing. And that's Ronda Rousey. That all goes on her shoulders. But now that she comes, you feel like there's pressure on her to keep that going.
I don't know if I would say there's pressure on her shoulders, because I mean, even if they go out and it's a dud, which I don't think is going to happen. I think the fight's going to be fantastic. But if it is a dud, there's still Ronda Rousey. Ronda Rousey's still Ronda Rousey. So it's not like that train's going to stop anytime soon. But it is definitely a chance for them to keep propelling it upward and keep this momentum going, because you're right, there is tremendous momentum behind the women right now. And justly so.
All right, let's talk about the rest of the card. We have Johnny Hendricks returning to the scene of the crime. He won the belt in this arena almost exactly a year ago. UFC 171, he defeated Robbie Lawler. He comes back after bicep surgery in December and loses the belt to Robbie Lawler. And he was supposed to get a 3rd crack at him. Didn't work out. He gets Matt Brown instead. And the weight has been a big topic. You've talked to him. You've seen him. Do you think this will be a big issue going into the fight? Because as he told you and many others, he considered retiring after that fight in December because the weight cut was just almost literally killing him.
Yeah, he considered retiring, and then after he decided not to retire, he considered going to middleweight, which is telling because he's not a tall guy at all. I don't think the weight's going to be an issue for him, to be honest, because I've been here for Johnny Hendricks Fight Week several times at this point, and I honestly have never seen him look as healthy and happy as he does this week. I actually talked to him about it today on Thursday, and he's been a more energetic, he's a more joyous guy this week, and he says he's being actively conscious of trying to do that. He was 179 today on Thursday. He said that was about 8 pounds less than he usually is. He looked great at Wednesday's open workouts. It seems like he's really taking this in stride and has really dedicated himself, committed himself to this change.
Interesting to note as well that Mike Dolce isn't in his corner this time around, so he's doing it on his own. That's going to be I think something of note to watch. And now you have a fight between a guy and Matt Brown. You know what Matt Brown is going to bring to the table. He wants to stand and trade. He wants to stand in the pocket. I mean, he wants to have that phone booth type of fight. And Hendricks, to a degree, has become that same sort of fighter. Against Robbie, there was some takedown defenses here and there, but I still maintain it felt like he was trying not to lose as opposed to win. Yeah. What do you think happens in this fight? Does he go back to the wrestling, or does he have that slugfest that everyone wants to see?
I don't know if he goes back to the wrestling just in fully, although I don't also think it's going to be a slugfest either. I think people forget that in the early rounds of that second Robbie Lawler fight, Johnny Hendricks' striking was really impressive. Like he's evolved from that guy who would kind of throw a combination, back out, circle, reset, throw like a single kick, back out, reset, and just keep doing that. He was mixing in his kicks and his combinations. He looked really great for the first couple rounds of that fight, just in terms of the striking. I feel like he's evolved. He's continually evolved. Like, he's still a young guy. And you're right, Matt Brown, he's that phone booth fighter. He loves to get in the clinch. He loves his elbows in the clinch, and his throws in the clinch are fantastic. But it seems to be that, or at least it seems to me that Johnny, this is a similar type of fight as the Robbie fight for Johnny. And Johnny's used to these fights. And again, he's dedicated himself, and he seems really just motivated. He's more motivated now than he was before he won the title. I honestly think this is Johnny Hendricks' fight to lose.
Your pick, official pick?
I think Johnny Hendricks take it by decision, and I think it's going to be a really fun fight.
Let's talk about a big heavyweight fight. We have Alistair Overeem returning. Speaking of returning to the scene of the crime, June of 2011, he defeated Fabricio Verdum for the second time here in the first round of the Strikeforce Heavyweight Grand Prix. He was the favorite, Never really saw that one play out because he was cut from the promotion and then eventually signed by the UFC. So he returns to Dallas. He likes Dallas very much, he said. He's fighting Roy Nelson, who, you know, has a lot to prove, I think. He's coming off a knockout loss to Mark Hunt. He's been so close to that title shot and never got it at this point in a division where, you know, it's easy to climb up the ranks because there aren't a lot of contenders. Who has more pressure on his shoulders going into this fight? Because Overeem, it hasn't been a great run in the UFC. You win one, you lose one, you win. It hasn't been a long, kind of, you know, successful run. So, in your opinion, who has more pressure on his shoulders?
You know, that's interesting. I haven't thought about that. I don't know if anybody really has pressure on their shoulders for this fight. It seems more to be just like a fun fight, a fun matchup. Overeem kind of relieved that pressure when he destroyed Struve back in Phoenix. And that's kind of the pattern for him. You know, he gets down a couple, and then people are going to get on him about when are you going to turn around. Roy's Roy. He's you know what he's going to do. He's going to jab and then throw that overhand right. It's going to be fun sometimes, and he's going to get frustrated sometimes. I feel like they're kind of who they are at this point. Roy, if we're being honest, is probably not going to make another title run. Overeem maybe is if he's able to string a few, but I don't know if anybody has pressure on their shoulders really.
How do you see it playing out?
It's interesting too because these guys play into their each other's weaknesses, right? Like Overeem's known to be a little chinny at this point. Roy Nelson's got that big right hand. And on the contrast, you know, Overeem's so technical and Roy Nelson's known to struggle with guys like that. I honestly think this is going to end up looking a lot like Roy Nelson's fight with Fabricio Verdum, where he's kind of getting out technical, he's getting out styled, and he ends up getting frustrated and he keeps spamming that overhand right and it just doesn't work out for him.
All right, and before we go, let's quickly touch on the Olympic gold medalist Henry Cejudo, giving 125 another go after looking very good at 135 in December. He's fighting Chris Cariaso, who's coming off a title loss to Demetrius Johnson at UFC 178. You spoke to Chris Cariaso, and he had some pretty amazing things to say about that. That was not a good experience for him. Of course, he lost, but, I mean, that almost ended his career. Is that accurate?
I don't know if it almost ended his career, but it was definitely, it made him think about things. I credit to him for how honest he was today. I was really surprised. He said he basically, like, the whole experience was just so negative. The whole week was spent people telling him, you're going to lose. And he was able to keep his composure, and he said, until about 5 minutes before he walked out. And when he heard I think he heard Joe Rogan on the broadcast say something about how he's going to have the performance of his life. And he said he had a panic attack in the locker room. And at that point, he was just a ghost of himself. You don't hear people admit that kind of thing. And he seemed in really good spirits today. He seemed really happy to have taken a back seat because Henry Cejudo's the guy who's doing all the media. He's the guy who has all the questions on him. There's a prop bet that you can bet whether he's going to make weight or not. I've never seen that before. And it seems like Cariaso's in a really good place for this fight. Although I would say that this is set up for Henry Cejudo to really have a showcase.
Is he your pick?
Cejudo is my pick. And I think, to be honest, we were all surprised about how developed his boxing was. His boxing was tremendous against Dustin Kimura back in Phoenix. I think if he wins this fight, he's set up to maybe be 1 or 2 fights away from a title shot, just at 125. The only thing is the weight. He needs to make the weight. If he fails the weight one more time, what is there for him? It's going to be tremendously embarrassing for him if he asks for this and then he fails once again. Although today he looks really good. So,
great stuff, my man. Enjoyed it.
Thank you.
A sneaky good card taking place here at the American Airlines Center on Saturday night. Typically, every time Zuffa has come here, they've been pretty good cards. So hopefully UFC 185, which appears to be very entertaining on paper, lives up to all of that hype. As always, MMAfighting.com will have our usual fight night coverage for you. This kicks off the Welcome to the Show campaign for the UFC, and it's fitting that Showtime Pettis is kicking it off. Looking forward to it. Thank you so much for watching. For Shaun, I am Ariel. We'll see you on Saturday night.